The rain hammered Fifth Street like bullets made of ice. Bowen Ruiz saw the red on his chest for half a heartbeat. Then the old woman in the gray coat threw herself in front of him. The crack of the rifle split the air. She went down hard. Bowen caught her before her skull hit the pavement, his tattooed hands, sin and fate across the knuckles, cradling a stranger who'd just taken his bullet. Blood poured from her thigh, hot against his cold skin. She weighed nothing, all bone and threadbare fabric. What? The word ripped out of him. Her eyes opened. Sharp. Too sharp for someone dying. I know what you did to Mateo. The name detonated in Bowen's chest. 20 years. 20 years he'd buried that night, that boy, that alley. The friend he'd abandoned. Sirens screamed closer. His men were scattered. The shooter was reloading. Bowen Ruiz, the butcher, the man who'd murdered 43 people without hesitation, lifted the dying grandmother into his arms and ran. Behind them, the red laser duck clicked off. Someone made a phone call, and Annie Gomez smiled through the blood on her teeth. If you think you know why she saved him, you're dead wrong. Bowen kicked through the penthouse door, so hard the hinges screamed. Garcia, his private surgeon, stumbled out of the guest bedroom, shirt half-buttoned, a woman's lipstick smeared on his collar. The man's face went white when he saw the blood. Exam room. Now. Bowen laid Annie on the steel table under the surgical lights. Her pulse was fading, her gray coat soaked black-red. Garcia's hand shook as he cut away fabric. Bowen, this woman needs a hospital. The femoral artery. Bowen pressed his Glock against Garcia's temple. You're a surgeon. Surge. The metal instruments clattered as Garcia worked, hands steadying the moment survival instinct kicked in. Bowen watched from the corner, his three-piece suit ruined, rain still dripping from his hair onto the marble floor. This penthouse was a fortress. Bulletproof glass, reinforced steel doors, panic rooms, 40 floors above the streets where men bled out in alleys. Safe. But safety didn't explain why his hands wouldn't stop shaking. Bullet missed the artery by millimeters. Garcia muttered, clamping vessels. But the fall, her ribs, internal bleeding. Fix it. 20 minutes. 30. Bowen didn't move, didn't blink, just watched this invisible old woman fight death on his table. When Garcia finally stepped back, sweat dripping down his face, he exhaled. She'll live. Maybe. The next 6 hours will tell. Bowen moved to the table. Annie's chest rose and fell, shallow but steady. Her wrinkled hands lay at her sides, palms up. Something white caught the light. Medical tape, wrapped around her palm. Bowen peeled it back. A key tumbled onto the steel table. Bronze. Old. The number 147 stamped into the metal. Bowen's blood turned to ice water. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the identical key he'd carried for 20 years. The one Mateo had given him the week before he died. The one that opened the storage unit where they'd hidden their escape money, their dreams, their future. Who the hell are you? Bowen whispered. Annie's eyes flickered open. I'm Mateo's mother, she said. And you're going to tell me everything. Have you ever saved the wrong person's life? Annie's eyes opened to silk sheets that cost more than her yearly rent. The ceiling above her was cream-colored, smooth as butter, with recessed lighting that didn't buzz like the fluorescent tube in her kitchen. Her leg throbbed, a deep, angry pulse that told her the bullet was gone, but the damage remained. She turned her head. 3 men stood by the door, automatic rifles slung across their chests, boots tracking mud across white marble floors. Off, Annie said. The guards blinked. Your boots. Off. You're ruining the floor. The largest one, tattoo of a serpent crawling up his neck, stared at her like she'd grown a second head. Lady, you almost died. And you're making a mess. Annie pushed herself up on her elbows, wincing. Your mothers would be ashamed. Serpent Neck looked at his partners. One of them, younger, maybe 20, actually glanced down at his muddy boots and looked guilty. Bowen stood in the corner, still wearing the blood-soaked suit, his dark eyes fixed on her like she was a bomb he didn't know how to defuse. The scent of expensive cologne mixed with copper and rain clung to him. You should be screaming, Bowen said quietly, demanding answers, threatening to go to the police. Annie smiled. The morphine made everything soft around the edges, but her mind was crystal clear. And say what? That I jumped in front of a bullet meant for the city's most dangerous man? They'd lock me in a psychiatric ward. She studied him, The sharp jawline, the way he held his shoulders like Atlas carrying the world, the tattoos peeking from his collar. Sin. Fate. The same words Mateo had doodled in his notebook 20 years ago, back when boys thought ink made them immortal. You look like him, she whispered. Same eyes. Same way of standing like you're apologizing for taking up space. Bowen's face cracked. Just for a heartbeat, the monster disappeared, and she saw the 16-year-old boy who'd watched her son die. He turned toward the door. I need to find who shot you. Annie's hand shot out, wrinkle liver-spotted, surprisingly fast, and grabbed his wrist. His pulse hammered against her fingers, rabbit-quick despite the calm exterior. Sit, Abuela. You are not leaving this house with blood on your hands. The guards shifted uncomfortably. Outside, thunder rumbled. Bowen stared down at this 72-year-old widow who'd just forbidden a killer from killing. Have you ever met someone so pure they made your demons flinch? The kitchen had never been used. Bowen watched from the doorway as Annie shuffled through his sub-zero refrigerator. $60,000 of stainless steel that contained 3 bottles of vodka, leftover Thai food, and a lemon from 2023. This is a crime, she muttered, pulling out wilted cilantro. A kitchen like this, and you fill it with poison. She'd refused the wheelchair, limped on her bandaged leg to the elevator, demanded Garcia take her downstairs, and somehow convinced Serpent Neck, whose name was actually Rico, to drive her to a mercado at 3 a.m. Now his fortress smelled like cumin and garlic. Annie moved through the space like she owned it, her gray cardigan dusted with flour, wooden spoon conducting an invisible orchestra. The pot on the stove hissed and bubbled, steam rising in silver ribbons that caught the dawn light filtering through bulletproof windows. Caldo de pollo. Chicken soup. The scent wrapped around Bowen's throat like a memory he'd tried to drown for 20 years. His abuela used to make this every Sunday, back before the streets took everything. Sit, Annie commanded without turning around. Bowen sat. She ladled soup into a hand-painted bowl. Where'd she found that? And placed it in front of him. The broth was golden, clear, with carrots and potatoes and chicken falling off the bone. Eat. He picked up the spoon. His tattooed fingers. Sin on the left, salvation on the right, wrapped around the metal handle. The words were prison-quality ink, faded and slightly crooked. Annie's hand stopped moving. She stared at his knuckles, her eyes widening, then reached into her cardigan pocket, pulled out a leather notebook, cracked and water-stained. Mateo's notebook. She opened it to a page dated June 1997. A teenage boy's drawing. 2 hands, fingers spread, the same words inked across the knuckles in ballpoint pen. Sin and salvation. That's what we are, Bowen. We get to choose which one wins. The spoon clattered from Bowen's hand. Who are you? His voice came out broken, raw, nothing like the butcher. Annie closed the notebook. Tears tracked down her weathered face, cutting through 20 years of grief like rivers through stone. I'm the woman who has been praying for you for 20 years. Bowen's office smelled like old leather and stale coffee, the kind that sat in the pot for 6 hours turning bitter. 3 monitors glowed in the darkness, casting blue light across his bloodshot eyes. He scrubbed through traffic camera footage frame by frame, the timestamp reading 11:47 p.m. There, the laser sight activating on Bellini's rooftop. The red dot swept the alley, hunting. It paused on a dumpster, moved left toward the street, then locked onto Annie's gray coat as she crossed behind a parked car. 3 full seconds of tracking. Then Bowen stepped into frame. His stomach dropped like he'd been pushed off a building. No. He rewound it. Watched again. The laser wasn't searching for him. It was stalking her. His mouth went dry, copper taste flooding his tongue like he'd bitten through his cheek. Bowen grabbed his phone, fingers shaking. Dig up everything on Annie Gomez. 10 minutes. He pulled up Garcia's secret ballistics report. The bullet wasn't standard cartel issue. Lapua .338, the kind used for high-value political hits. The kind that cost $3,000 per round. Someone wanted Annie dead badly enough to spend serious money. His phone buzzed. Encrypted file loaded. Annie Maria Gomez. Age 72. Widow. Former courthouse clerk. Nothing. Parking tickets. Grocery receipts. A woman who disappeared into bureaucratic invisibility. Then he scrolled deeper, and his blood turned to ice. Witness statement. Case #4429-1997. Murder of District Attorney Ramon Vega. The sealed file cracked open under his decryption software, pixels forming into words that made his chest tighten. I, Annie Maria Gomez, testify that on the night of August 12, 1997, I witnessed Antino Alzano Reyes shoot District Attorney Ramon Vega 3 times outside the courthouse. El Santo, the man who controlled the Iron Vein. The man who'd been systematically erasing everyone connected to that case for 25 years. Annie wasn't collateral damage. She was the endgame. And Bowen had just painted a target on her back by dragging her into his fortress, his world, his war. Dios mío, he whispered. The coffee in his cup had gone cold. She saved me, and I killed her. Footsteps behind him, soft, limping. Annie appeared in the doorway holding 2 steaming mugs, her gray cardigan buttoned crooked. You haven't slept, she said gently, crossing toward him. The lights died. Every screen went black simultaneously, the hum of electronics cutting to dead silence. Even the city noise outside seemed to vanish, leaving only the sound of Annie's sharp intake of breath. Bowen's hand moved to his gun. The emergency lights kicked in, blood red, pulsing like a dying heartbeat. Annie's coffee mug shattered on marble, the crash echoing like gunfire. 40 floors below, a low rumble shook the foundation. Dust rained from the ceiling. Bowen. Annie's voice cracked. He grabbed her wrist and pulled her close, his other hand keying the security channel on his radio. Static. Dead. They cut the power, he growled. They cut everything. Another rumble. Closer. The penthouse windows rattled. Annie's fingers dug into his arm. What's happening? Bowen looked at the dead monitors, at the emergency lights painting her terrified face in crimson, at the fortress he'd built to be impenetrable, and realized fortresses only work if the enemy fights fair. They'd been found, and the Iron Vein wasn't knocking. The windows exploded inward. Glass became 1,000 knives flying through the penthouse, the shockwave from the C4 blast slamming Bowen into the desk. His ears rang like church bells, the world muted and distorted. Annie screamed. He saw her mouth open, but heard nothing except high-pitched whining. Smoke poured through the shattered windows, black and chemical, burning his throat. The smell hit next. Burning plastic, melting insulation, the acrid stench of military-grade explosives. Bowen grabbed Annie, yanking her behind the overturned desk as gunfire erupted. Bullets punched through drywall, shredded leather furniture, shattered the monitors into sparking debris. His hearing returned in fragments. Shouting. Automatic weapons. Rico's voice screaming into a radio. There in the stairwell. A second explosion cut him off. The floor tilted. Bowen felt the building shift, structural supports groaning like a dying animal. We have to move. He pulled Annie toward the panic room, but the door was buried under collapsed ceiling tiles. 30 seconds, maybe less before the Iron Vein reached this floor. The elevator shaft, Bowen growled. He ripped open the emergency panel, exposing the dark vertical tunnel that dropped 40 stories. You're insane. Annie coughed through the smoke. I'm effective. Bowen grabbed a maintenance harness from the emergency kit, the nylon straps designed for one person, maybe 200 pounds. Annie weighed 90. He weighed 215. This won't hold us, she said, reading his mind. It'll hold long enough. He strapped her to his back like a child, her arms wrapped around his neck, her bandaged leg pressed against his ribs. She smelled like soup in terror. If we die, Annie whispered in his ear, I forgive you. Don't. Bowen clipped the harness to the cable. I don't deserve it. He jumped. The cable screamed, metal on metal, sparks raining above them as they plummeted through darkness. Bowen's hands burned, the friction glove smoking. 10 floors. 20. His shoulders felt like they were tearing from the sockets. 35 floors down, he jammed the brake. They slammed into the garage-level door. Bowen kicked it open, unclipped the harness, and dragged Annie into the concrete parking structure. His Mercedes sat 20 feet away, sleek and black and promising escape. Bowen opened the door. The interior was filled with wires, blinking red lights. The car was a bomb. There, Annie pointed to the corner. A beat-up 97 Civic with primer spots and a missing hubcap. Bowen didn't ask questions. He grabbed a rock and smashed the window, hot-wired the ignition in 8 seconds flat. The engine coughed to life, sounding like a lawnmower with emphysema. "Bell on," he barked. Annie barely clicked hers before Bowen floored it. The Civic screamed up the garage ramp, just as 3 black SUVs roared down. Bullets sparked off the concrete, punched through the Civic's trunk. The back window exploded. Bowen yanked the wheel hard right, fishtailing onto the street. Rain hammered the cracked windshield, the wipers barely functional, one blade hanging by a screw. "Left!" Annie shouted. Bowen cranked the wheel. An SUV blasted past them, T-boning a parked delivery truck in a shower of sparks and twisted metal. The city became a blur of neon and rain. Bowen weaved through traffic, the Civic's bald tires hydroplaning on every turn. His hands ached, his shoulders still screaming from the elevator descent. In the rearview mirror, 2 SUVs gaining. "There's a gun under your seat," Annie said calmly, like she was asking him to pass the salt. "What?" She didn't repeat herself. Bowen reached down, felt the cold metal. A snub-nosed .38 revolver loaded. "Whose car is this?" he shouted over the engine's death rattle. Annie smiled grimly. "Mine. I told you I'd been preparing." Muzzle flashes lit up the night behind them. The Civic's side mirror exploded. "Comment drive, if you think Annie should take the wheel." Ahead, the bridge. Below, the river, black and swollen from a storm. The Iron Vein SUVs were 15 feet back. 10. 5. "Do you trust me?" Bowen asked. Annie looked at him. This man who'd abandoned her son. This killer she'd saved. This broken soul she'd been praying for. "Yes." Bowen yanked the emergency brake and spun the wheel. The Civic went sideways, tires shrieking, then flipped the barrier rail like a dolphin breaching water. Time slowed. They hung in midair, rain suspended like diamonds. Then gravity won. The river swallowed them whole. Everything went black. Cold. That was Bowen's first conscious thought. The kind of cold that made bones ache, that turned blood to slush. He was alive. He opened his eyes to darkness and the sound of water dripping. Rhythmic, endless, like a clock counting down to nothing. "Annie." His voice echoed. "Here." She sat 3 feet away, soaked gray cardigan clinging to her frame, shivering violently. They were under a bridge, the river's edge lapping at their feet. Above them, traffic rumbled like distant thunder. The Civic had somehow stayed afloat long enough for them to kick out the windows and swim for shore. Bowen's entire body was a symphony of pain. His shoulder, dislocated probably. Ribs, at least 2 cracked. Blood trickled from a gash above his eye. "Can you walk?" he asked. Annie nodded, teeth chattering. He helped her up. They stumbled through the darkness until Bowen spotted it. An abandoned church, its stained glass windows shattered, weeds growing through cracked stone steps. Inside, the air smelled like centuries of rain and rot. Damp stone, mildew, something else darker underneath. Holy water in the font had turned green with algae. But it was shelter. Bowen collapsed against a pew. Annie limped over, her hand surprisingly steady as she tore strips from her slip. The woman had been wearing a slip under her house dress, like his abuela used to. "Let me see," she commanded. She cleaned his wounds with rainwater from a puddle, her weathered fingers gentle despite the cold. The roles had reversed, the killer now tended by the grandmother. "You saved me," Bowen whispered. "Again. You carry me down 40 floors. Annie pressed cloth against his bleeding temple. "We're even." "No." Bowen caught her wrist. "We're not. Mateo was my son, and you were his best friend." Her eyes glistened in the darkness. "I've watched you from afar for 20 years, Bowen. Watched you become exactly what you swore you'd never be. Then why save me?" Annie's hand touched his cheek. Cold, soft, devastating in its kindness. "Because someone has to believe you can still choose salvation." Outside, sirens wailed. Inside, water dripped, and Bowen Ruiz, the butcher, the man without a soul, felt something crack open in his chest. The church grew colder as dawn approached. Bowen couldn't sleep. His body was shutting down, shock, hypothermia, blood loss, but his mind wouldn't stop spinning. Annie sat across from him, backlit by gray light filtering through broken windows. She reached into her soaked cardigan and pulled out a locket, brass and tarnished, hanging from a chain around her neck. "I need to show you something," she said quietly. She opened it. Inside, 2 faces. A teenage boy with a crooked smile, Mateo. And next to him, arms slung around his shoulders, a skinnier, younger version of Bowen. Both laughing. Both alive. August 1997, Annie said. 2 weeks before he died. Bowen couldn't breathe. You wore that stupid leather jacket every day. Too big for you. Mateo said you bought it from a thrift store because you thought it made you look tough. Her voice cracked. You were babies playing dress-up in a world that wanted to devour you. Annie, the night he died, you were supposed to meet him behind the courthouse. 2 kids planning to run away together, start fresh in California. She closed the locket, but you didn't show up. The words hit Bowen like bullets. I was scared, he whispered. The cartel found out we were planning to leave. They threatened my sister. Said if I ran, they'd. His voice broke. So I hid. I called Mateo and told him to wait. But he went anyway, and they killed him for it. Tears carved tracks through the grime on his face. I was a coward. I let him die alone. You were 16 years old. I should have. You were a boy. Annie crawled across the stone floor and pulled him into her arms. Bowen shattered. 20 years of carefully constructed armor, of violence and ruthlessness, of becoming the monster so he'd never feel weak again. All of it collapsed. He sobbed into this old woman's shoulder, his body shaking, gasping for air between broken apologies. I saved you, Annie whispered, because you're the only piece of my son I have left. You're what he could have become if the world had been kinder. She held him tighter. And I'm not losing you again. Outside, footsteps crunched on gravel. A voice called out, Bowen, Hamano, I know you're in there. Silas, his second in command. Annie's eyes went wide. Do you trust him? Bowen's jaw tightened. I did. The gunshot wound in Bowen's shoulder had stopped bleeding, but the rage burning through his chest more than made up for it. Rico stood in the church doorway, rifle raised, 12 more of Bowen's men fanning out behind him through the shattered windows, silhouettes backlit by dawn. Stand down, Rico, Bowen called from behind the stone pillar. This is between me and him. Rico didn't lower his weapon. Boss, we've been tracking your phone since the river. Took us 2 hours to find you. So that's how they'd survived. His own men had been shadowing them the entire time, waiting for the right moment. Loyalty, the one thing Bowen had never thought he'd earned. Silas raised his hand slowly, that familiar smile plastered across his face. Bowen, Hermano, let's talk about this. Talk. Bowen's voice could have cut steel. You sold me out for money. You pointed a gun at an old woman. He stepped out from behind the pillar, his own weapon steady despite the blood loss. What's left to talk about? 2 million buys a lot of forgiveness, Silas said, but his eyes kept darting to the exits Rico's men had already blocked. El Santo promised me your territory. Nothing personal, just business. Nothing personal. The words tasted like acid. I paid for your mother's funeral when you couldn't afford the casket. I stood as godfather to your daughter. I appreciate it. Silas shrugged, but sweat beaded on his forehead. But appreciation doesn't buy islands in the Caribbean. His hand twitched toward his jacket. Don't, Rico shouted. Silas drew. The suppressed shot cracked through the church, impossibly loud in the stone chamber. Annie screamed. Bowen had already moved, shoving her sideways. The bullet meant for her head caught him in the shoulder, the same shoulder already torn open, pain exploding white-hot through his vision. He went down hard, blood spraying across ancient stone. Annie fell beside him, her small body covering his, trying to protect him again with nothing but flesh and bone. No, Rico's voice boomed. Suddenly the church lit up. Red laser dots, dozens of them, dancing across Silas's chest, his face, his gun hand. Every window held a rifle. Every shadow held one of Bowen's soldiers. Silas froze. Drop it, Rico commanded, or I paint this church with you. The Glock clattered to the floor, but Bowen barely heard it. His vision tunneled, darkness creeping in from the edges. Annie's face swam above him, her wrinkled hands pressing against his wound, her lips moving in prayers or curses. He couldn't tell which. Stay with me, she begged. Don't you dare leave me now. Bowen tried to speak, but his tongue felt thick. Cold was spreading through his limbs despite the warmth of Annie's hands. Rico zip-tied Silas and knelt beside them. We need to move him. Now. The car. Annie started. Already here. 2 blocks over. Rico looked at Bowen, something like respect in his eyes. You taught us to always have a backup plan, boss. Bowen wanted to laugh, but coughing blood seemed more likely. They'd come for him, not for money, not for territory, because somewhere along the way, the monster had earned something he never thought possible. A family. Rico lifted him in a fireman's carry. Annie limped alongside, one hand gripping Bowen's, the other clutching Rico's tactical vest for balance. Behind them, Silas shouted, "You're dead anyway. El Santo knows where you are. He's all ready." One of the men drove a rifle, but into his mouth. Teeth scattered. As they carried Bowen out into the gray dawn, his phone, cracked but somehow still functional, buzzed in Rico's pocket. Unknown number. Rico put on speaker. El Santo's voice poured out, smooth as poison honey. "Hello, Butcher. I see you found my little gift." Silas always was weak, wasn't he? But it doesn't matter. I know you're bleeding out. I know your men are scattered. And I know exactly how to make you come to me. Ow! Rico growled. The neighborhood. El Santo's laugh was ice water. Bellini's block. The school. The bodega. The church where all those families pray on Sunday. I'm going to burn it all unless the Butcher meets me at Pier 19. Alone. 1 hour. The line went dead. Bowen's eyes opened, clarity cutting through the pain like a blade. He looked at Annie, at Rico, at the men who'd risked everything to save him. And he knew what he had to do. But the damage was already done. The trap was set, and Bowen was walking it anyway. The gunshot wound in Bowen's shoulder was nothing compared to the rage now burning through his veins. He looked at Silas, his brother, his second, the man who'd eaten at his table for 15 years, and something ancient and terrible woke up inside him. "Rico." Bowen's voice came out flat, dead. "Take Annie outside." "Bowen, no." Annie tried to grab his arm. "Now." Rico pulled her toward the side door. She fought him, her eyes locked on Bowen's face, and what she saw there made her go pale. The monster was coming out. Bowen stood, blood soaking through his shirt, and walked toward Silas. His men had Silas surrounded, 8 rifles trained on one traitor, but Bowen waved them back. "Just you and me, hermano." Silas laughed nervously. "You're bleeding out. You can barely stand. Then it should be easy." Bowen moved. 20 years of street fights, prison yards, cartel wars, all of it condensed into 5 seconds of pure violence. He grabbed Silas by the throat and slammed him into the stone altar hard enough to crack ribs. "I trusted you." Bowen's fist connected with Silas's jaw. Teeth flew. "I saved you." Another punch, this one breaking the nose. "And you sold me out for money." Silas fumbled for his backup piece. Ankle holster, .22 revolver. But Bowen was faster. He twisted Silas's wrist until bones snapped like dry twigs. The scream echoed through the church. "Boss, he's done." Rico called from the doorway. Bowen didn't stop. He drove Silas's face into the stone floor once, twice, 3 times. Blood pooled on the ancient stones, mixing with centuries of prayers and dust. "Bowen." Annie's voice cut through the red haze. He looked up. She stood in the doorway, tears streaming down her weathered face, her hand covering her mouth in horror. And Bowen saw himself through her eyes. Knuckles split open, face splattered with another man's blood, breathing like a rabid animal. Not a man. A butcher. The thing he'd promised Mateo he'd never become. His phone rang. Unknown number. Bowen answered, his voice hoarse. "What?" "Hello, Butcher." El Santo's voice was smooth, amused. "I see you found my little gift." Silas was always weak. "Where are you?" "The docks. Pier 19. You have 1 hour to arrive, alone, or I burn the neighborhood. Every house, every family, every child." The line went dead. Annie's whisper reached him across the blood-stained church. "Don't go. Please. We can run." But they both knew the truth. Running was over. Portugal. Annie said it like a prayer, like the word itself could save them. "I have money hidden. Enough for both of us. We disappear. Start over." She gripped Bowen's blood-soaked sleeve, her fingers trembling. "You don't owe these streets anything." Bowen stared at the shattered stained glass, light filtering through in fractured colors. Red, blue, gold, like the city itself, broken but still beautiful. "He'll kill them," Bowen said quietly. "Everyone. The bodega owner who lets kids steal candy. The teacher who stays late. The grandmother who feeds stray cats." He turned to face her. "Your neighbors, Annie. The people who brought you soup when you were sick. He'll burn them alive to prove a point. Then let the police. The police can't stop El Santo. You know that. You've known that for 25 years. His voice cracked. That's why you testified. Why you spent decades looking over your shoulder. Because the law doesn't reach men like him. Annie's face crumpled. But if you go, you'll die. Probably. Then what's the point? She grabbed his face with both hands, forcing him to meet her eyes. Mateo would want you to live. He'd want you to be happy. To choose yourself for once. Mateo's dead because I chose myself. Bowen's words were knives. I ran. I hid. I let my best friend walk into a bullet because I was too scared to stand beside him. Tears tracked through the grime on his face. I can't run again, Abuela. Not this time. Annie pulled him in her arms, her small frame shaking with sobs. You were a boy then. You're a man now. Then let me be a man worth remembering. He kissed her forehead, gentle, final, and walked toward the basement stairs. Where are you going? Panic edged her voice. To make sure you're safe. The basement door was solid oak, reinforced with steel. An old priest's sanctuary from when the neighborhood was different, when churches were fortresses. Bowen guided Annie inside. No, Bowen, no. He closed the door. The lock clicked. Her fists pounded against the wood, muffled screams echoing up the stone stairwell. I'm sorry, he whispered. Then he walked toward his death. The rain had stopped. The city stretched before him, wet pavement reflecting neon like spilled paint. Bowen walked down the center of 5th Street, alone, his footsteps echoing between empty buildings. He'd left everything behind. The Rolex his father gave him, on the church steps. The gold ring with his family crest beside it. The bulletproof vest Rico tried to force on him. Refused. Just a man in a blood-stained shirt walking toward an army. Windows opened as he passed. Faces appeared. The mechanic, the baker, the schoolteacher. People who'd lived under his protection for years, who'd paid their weekly tribute, who'd whispered his name like a ward against evil. They watched him go. Some crossed themselves. Others wept. Everyone understood what this walk meant. A sacrifice. Bowen's phone buzzed. Messages flooding in. Don't go. We'll fight with you. My boys are ready. Just say the word. You saved my daughter. Let me save you. He turned the phone off. This wasn't their fight. It never had been. This was about a boy who died in an alley 20 years ago, about a grandmother who'd spent 2 decades praying for a killer's soul, about choosing redemption over survival. The docks appeared ahead, shipping containers stacked like steel mountains, cranes frozen like sleeping giants. Pier 19. 40 men waited, maybe more. Black SUVs formed a semicircle, headlights creating a makeshift arena. El Santo stood in the center, white suit pristine. Smoking a cigar like this was a social call. The butcher arrives. El Santo's voice boomed across the docks. Alone and unarmed. How noble. How stupid. Bowen kept walking. His shoulder throbbed where Silas's bullet had torn through. His ribs screamed with each breath. His hands were empty of everything except 20 years of guilt. But his eyes were clear. We all hope we be this brave. Bowen is walking to his death. He stopped 10 feet from El Santo. I'm here. Let them go. El Santo smiled, teeth white as tombstones. Oh, butcher, did you really think I'd keep my word? He raised his hand. 20 guns cocked simultaneously, and the slaughter began. Bowen moved before the first shot rang out. He dove left, rolled behind a shipping container as bullets sparked off steel like angry hornets. His body moved on instinct, 20 years of survival training. But without a weapon, without armor, he was just meat waiting to be ground. A shadow rounded the corner. Bowen grabbed the man's rifle barrel, yanked him forward, and drove his forehead into the Sicario's nose. Bone crunched. The rifle clattered free. Bowen caught it mid-fall and fired 3 rounds before the magazine clicked empty. Surround him. El Santo's voice commanded from somewhere beyond the containers. Footsteps everywhere. 10 men. 20. Closing in like wolves on wounded prey. Bowen dropped the empty rifle and ran deeper into the container maze, his breath coming in ragged gasps. Blood poured from his shoulder, leaving a trail Hansel would envy. He turned a corner and found El Santo waiting. No guards, no guns, just 2 men and the space between them. You should have run, butcher. El Santo cracked his knuckles. The man was 60 but built like a bull, shoulders broad, hands scarred from decades of enforcing his own orders. I'm done running. They collided. El Santo fought like a street fighter, dirty, brutal, efficient. Knee to the gut, elbow to the jaw. He grabbed Bowen's wounded shoulder and squeezed until Bowen screamed. Bowen responded with a headbutt that split El Santo's lip. He drove the older man into the container wall, denting steel, then followed with a combination that would have dropped a normal person. El Santo laughed through broken teeth and returned fire. They grappled, trading blows that echoed across the empty docks. Bowen's vision blurred. His legs weakened. Blood loss was catching up, turning his muscles to water. El Santo sensed it. He swept Bowen's legs and drove him face first into the concrete. You were always weak, El Santo growled, pulling a .45 from his waistband. Just like that boy, what was his name? Mateo. He pressed the barrel against Bowen's skull. Any last words, butcher? Bowen closed his eyes, saw Annie's face, Mateo's smile. The life he could have lived if he'd been braver 20 years ago. Yeah, he whispered. I forgive myself. El Santo's finger tightened on the trigger. Then the lights came. Headlights, dozens of them, blazing from every direction. Trucks, sedans, motorcycles, even a school bus. They surrounded the docks like a constellation coming to life, horns blaring, high beams blinding El Santo's men. What the? El Santo spun, gun lowering for just a heartbeat. Bowen swept his legs. The .45 skittered across concrete. Both men scrambled for it, but a worn sneaker kicked it away. Annie stood there, gray hair wild, bandaged leg bleeding through fresh wrappings. Behind her, the neighborhood, the mechanic with his sons, the baker with her rolling pin, the schoolteacher with a baseball bat, the bodega owner, the grandmother who fed stray cats. 50 people, 100, more arriving every second. You came for him, Annie's voice rang out. But you forgot something. This neighborhood doesn't abandon its own. El Santo's sicarios raised their weapons, but hesitated. How do you shoot a crowd of grandmothers and school teachers? How do you massacre witnesses when every phone is recording? Shoot them. El Santo screamed. Nobody moved. Bowen used the distraction. He lunged, grabbing El Santo from behind, his forearm crushing the man's windpipe. With his free hand, he pulled a knife from El Santo's boot, 8 inches of carbon steel, the same blade El Santo had used to kill the district attorney in 1997. Please, El Santo choked. I'll disappear. I'll give you everything. Bowen pressed the knife against his throat. 1 slash. That's all it would take. Justice for Mateo. For Annie. For 25 years of terror. His hand shook. Do it, someone shouted from the crowd. He deserves it, another voice. But Bowen looked at Annie, at the neighborhood that had risked everything to save him, at the phones recording this moment for the world to see. And he remembered Mateo's words. We get to choose which one wins. Sin or salvation. Bowen threw the knife into the water. Call the police, he said. The real police. The ones El Santo doesn't own. He forced El Santo to his knees. You don't get to die a martyr. You get to rot in a cell forgotten. El Santo spat blood. They'll never hold me. They held you before. Annie's testimony put you away for 5 years. Bowen looked at her. She'll testify again. And this time, Annie stepped forward, phone raised. This time, everyone will listen. 1 year later, the smell of rising dough filled the small shop on 5th Street, where a butcher shop used to stand. Bowen pulled the loaves from the oven, golden, crusted, perfect. His hands, once tattooed with sin and salvation, now dusted with flour. The tattoos were still there, faded but visible, a reminder of who he'd been, and who he'd chosen not to be. Too much yeast, Annie said from her corner table, glasses perched on her nose, newspaper spread before her. I can smell it from here. The customers love it. The customers don't know better. But she smiled, the wrinkles around her eyes deepening. The bell above the door chimed. Rico entered, no longer wearing tactical gear, just a simple shirt and jeans. He works security at the community center now, teaching kids boxing instead of killing. Morning, boss. I'm not your boss anymore. Habit. Rico grabbed a roll, still warm. Annie, you coming to the thing tonight? What thing? She asked suspiciously. The neighborhood's naming the new park. Thought you might want to be there. Annie waved him off. I'm too old for ceremonies. But she was already planning what to wear. Bowen saw it in her eyes. The shop filled throughout the morning. The mechanic buying bread for his family. The teacher getting pastries for her students. People whose lives had been touched by violence, but who'd chosen to rebuild. Forgiveness was a strange thing. It didn't erase the past. Bowen still woke some nights gasping. Mateo's face burned into his dreams. But Annie would be there, in the apartment above the bakery, making tea and refusing to let him drown. You think he'd be proud? Bowen asked quietly, kneading new dough. Annie didn't ask who he meant. I think he'd be proud you finally chose yourself. The good parts. Outside, the neighborhood moved on. El Santo was serving life in a federal prison. The iron vein had dissolved. The streets were safer, though never perfectly safe. Bowen looked at his hands, flour, not blood. Redemption wasn't a destination. It was a choice. Made every morning. In every loaf of bread. In every moment, he chose creation over destruction. Redemption is a choice. If you believe in second chances, subscribe now. The oven timer dinged. Bowen smiled and began again.
Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as crazier and more intriguing as you can ever imagine. So do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one.